Welcome to the Mr. Tomb Stories channel.
Shh. Gather round, you brave souls. Tonight we delve into a chilling tale that began with a simple book club. What unfolded for Molly, the ever-curious leader, her sharp-witted best friend Tyra, the seemingly fearless jock Dash, and the insightful Simon, well, it will make the hairs on your neck stand on end. Their innocent attempt to confront their fears unleashed something far darker, something that lingers in the shadows, waiting. Dare to witness their descent into the unknown? Then hit that like button and subscribe for more terrifying stories. And now, let the nightmare begin. The flickering fluorescent light above Simon's head did little to dispel the growing unease in the small green building. He had been the first to arrive, as usual, his glasses perched precariously on his nose as he scanned the room. Last week's meeting had been eventful. Molly's attempts to have them face their fears had been more silly than scary, but something about Dash's reaction in the alleyway afterward had stuck with him. A genuine fear. Not the playful jump scare they'd orchestrated. He remembered Dash's wide, panicked eyes when he'd finally stumbled back onto the main street, his face pale and slick with sweat. He'd mumbled something about a gray forest and voices, but when Simon had pressed him, Dash had just shaken his head, claiming it was his imagination running wild. But Simon wasn't so sure. There had been a raw terror in his friend's voice that he couldn't shake. Molly and Tyra burst through the door, their laughter echoing in the otherwise silent room. Molly, as energetic as ever, was already setting up. Tyra, glued to her phone, offered a casual wave. Dash followed shortly after, a nervous energy about him that Simon hadn't seen before. "All right. Everyone's here." Molly clapped her hands together, her usual bright smile slightly strained. "So, last week ended unexpectedly, and I've been thinking." Tyra finally looked up from her phone. "Thinking about how your scare tactics were about as effective as a chocolate teapot?" Molly's smile wavered for a moment before returning with forced enthusiasm. "No. I was thinking, perhaps we need to delve a little deeper into what truly frightens us, beyond puppets and empty rooms." Dash shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I don't know about that, Molly. What happened in the alleyway, it felt real." Simon nodded in agreement. "He wasn't the same afterward. He kept looking over his shoulder." Molly's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. "It was just an alleyway, Dash. Your imagination probably played tricks on you." But the mist and the trees," Dash stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Okay, Tyra interrupted, sensing the growing tension. "Let's just stick to the plan, Molly. What did you have in mind?" Molly seemed to regain her composure. "Right. Well, since last week was about confronting individual fears, I thought this week we could explore something collective. Something that might tap into a more primal fear within all of us." Simon felt a knot forming in his stomach. He didn't like the sound of this. Molly's initial enthusiasm seemed to have morphed into something else, something more intense. "And what exactly does that entail?" Simon asked cautiously. Molly's eyes gleamed with an unsettling intensity. "Tonight, we're going to try a little experiment. We're going to attempt a seance." A stunned silence filled the room. Tyra was the first to break it with a disbelieving laugh. "A seance? Seriously, Molly? Are we trying to contact Casper the friendly ghost now?" "It's not about ghosts, Tyra," Molly said, her voice taking on a hushed tone. "It's about exploring the unknown, about tapping into something beyond our understanding." Dash looked terrified. I don't want to do that, Molly. What if something answers?" "That's the point, Dash," Molly replied, her voice almost hypnotic. "To see what's out there, to confront the ultimate fear, the fear of the unknown." Simon felt a wave of unease wash over him. He'd always been skeptical of anything supernatural, but the look in Molly's eyes, it was unnerving. It was like she wasn't entirely herself. I don't think this is a good idea, Molly," Simon said, trying to inject some logic into the situation. "Don't be such a scaredy cat, Simon," Tyra scoffed, although even her voice held a hint of nervousness. "It's probably just some silly game Molly cooked up." But Simon didn't think it was a game. He could feel it in the air, a thick, heavy tension that had nothing to do with Molly's usual antics. Molly ignored their protests and began arranging the small table in the center of the room. She placed a single, flickering candle on it and instructed them to sit around it, holding hands. "We need to focus our energy. We need to open ourselves up to whatever might be listening." Reluctantly, they joined hands, the flickering candlelight casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The silence in the room grew, punctuated only by the sound of their breathing and the crackling of the candle flame. "Is anyone there?" Molly whispered, her eyes wide and fixed on the flame. Nothing happened. The candle continued to flicker, and the silence remained unbroken. Simon started to feel a sense of relief, thinking that perhaps this whole thing was just a bust. Then the candle flame suddenly flared, growing taller and brighter, casting an eerie glow on their faces. A gust of wind seemed to sweep through the room, even though the windows were closed. Tyra gasped, her grip tightening on Simon's hand. Dash let out a small choked sound. Even Molly's eyes widened with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Someone's here," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I can feel it." A low guttural sound seemed to emanate from the shadows in the corner of the room. It was a sound that sent shivers down Simon's spine, a sound that felt ancient and malevolent. What was that?" Dash stammered, his eyes darting around the room. "I don't know," Molly whispered, her voice barely audible. "But we need to be respectful. We need to show that we mean no harm." The guttural sound came again, closer this time. The shadows in the corners seemed to deepen, to writhe with an unseen presence. Suddenly, the temperature in the room plummeting, a bone-chilling cold washed over them, making Simon's teeth chatter. I don't like this," Tyra whispered, her voice trembling. "We can't stop now," Molly said, her eyes fixated on the shadows. "We've made contact. We need to see what it wants." A raspy voice like nails scratching on a chalkboard echoed through the room. "You're next." Dash let out a terrified scream and tried to pull his hand away, but Molly's grip was like iron. Tyra's eyes rolled back in her head, and she slumped forward, unconscious. Simon's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to run, to get as far away from this place as possible, but he felt rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. The shadows in the corner began to coalesce, taking on a vaguely human form. It was tall and gaunt, with long, spindly limbs and eyes that glowed with an unholy light. Who are you?" Molly stammered, her voice barely a whisper. The figure glided silently toward them, its glowing eyes fixed on Dash. Dash let out a strangled cry and squeezed his eyes shut. "No!" he screamed, as the figure reached out a long, skeletal hand and touched his forehead. Dash's body went rigid, and a blood-curdling long scream tore from his throat. Then, just as suddenly, he went limp. Simon watched in horror as the figure turned its attention to Molly. Molly, who had initiated this terrifying ordeal, now looked like a cornered animal, her bravado completely gone. "Please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "I loved you." The figure tilted its head, its glowing eyes devoid of any emotion. It reached out and touched Molly in the same way it had touched Dash. A silent scream contorted her features before she, too, went limp. Simon was the only one left conscious. The figure turned its gaze upon him, its glowing eyes piercing his very soul. "Don't leave me! Don't leave me!" Simon pleaded, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "I'm so sorry! You promised!" The figure remained silent for a moment, its gaze unwavering. Then it spoke again, its raspy voice sending a fresh wave of terror through Simon. "It's too late." Simon closed his eyes, bracing himself for the inevitable. "I can't do this! Come back! I need you!" He felt a cold touch on his forehead, and then nothing. The flickering candle sputtered and died, plunging the room into complete darkness. The guttural sounds and the chilling cold were gone. The only sound was the gentle breeze rustling the leaves outside. A few moments later, the door creaked open, and Dash stumbled into the room, his face pale and his eyes wide with terror. I saw him!" he gasped, his voice shaking. "It's behind me!" He looked around the room, his eyes landing on the slumped figures of Molly and Tyra. "Guys, what happened?" Just then, Tyra stirred, groaning softly as she sat up, rubbing her head. "Oh, what hit me?" Molly slowly sat up as well, looking disoriented. I don't remember anything." Simon remained slumped on the floor, his eyes open but unfocused. He could still feel the cold touch on his forehead, the lingering echo of the figure's voice. We need to get out of here," Dash stammered, his eyes darting nervously towards the corner where the figure had been. "Now!" They helped Simon to his feet, and the four of them stumbled out of the small green building and into the cool night air. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows as they walked in silence, each lost in their own terrifying thoughts. They reached the alleyway where Dash had experienced his strange encounter the week before. It looked ordinary enough under the streetlight, just a narrow passage between two buildings. But as they passed it, Dash suddenly stopped, his breath catching in his throat. That's it," he whispered, pointing into the darkness. "That's where it happened." A faint gray mist seemed to swirl within the alleyway, even though there was no wind. The air around it felt noticeably colder. Simon felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck. He could have sworn he heard a faint whisper coming from the darkness. "Let's just go," Tyra said nervously, pulling on Dash's arm. "There's nothing there." But Dash stood frozen, his eyes wide and fixed on something in the mist. "I heard it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's calling my name." Suddenly, a figure emerged from the mist. It was tall and gaunt, with long, spindly limbs and eyes that glowed with an unholy light. It was the same figure Simon had seen in the book club building. Dash let out a strangled scream and tried to back away, but his feet seemed rooted to the ground. The figure glided silently towards him, its glowing eyes fixed on his. "Leave me alone!" Dash screamed, tears streaming down his face. "I'm begging you!" The figure reached out a long, skeletal hand and touched Dash's forehead. Dash's body went rigid, and another blood-curdling long scream echoed down the street before he collapsed to the ground. Simon and Tyra stood frozen in horror, unable to move, unable to speak. The figure turned its gaze towards them, its glowing eyes filled with an ancient, malevolent hunger. "Stay with me," it rasped, its voice like nails scratching on a chalkboard. Tyra finally found her voice, letting out a high-pitched shriek as she turned and fled down the street. Simon tried to follow, but his legs felt like lead. The figure moved with unnatural speed, cutting him off. Simon stumbled backward, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'm not crazy," he pleaded, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "You don't believe me. It's real, I swear." The figure tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. I saw her eyes. She was staring at me. He was right there. Simon continued to babble, his mind racing, trying to make sense of the terrifying events. The figure reached out and touched Simon's forehead. This time there was no pain, only a profound sense of understanding. Images flooded Simon's mind, the gray forest, the faint voices, the feeling of being utterly alone. He saw Dash walking down the alleyway, drawn by an unseen force. He saw Molly's desperate attempt to make contact, her misguided curiosity unleashing something truly evil. "Don't go! He was right there! I'm dying!" The figure remained silent, its touch cold and lifeless. Then it spoke, its raspy voice echoing in the empty alleyway. "You opened the door." A wave of despair washed over Simon. He understood now. Molly's seance hadn't summoned anything new. It had merely awakened something that had already been there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for an invitation. "You summoned me. I'll never leave. We're one now." A searing pain shot through Simon's head, and he felt his consciousness fading away. The last thing he saw was the figure's glowing eyes, filled with an eternal darkness. Tyra ran as fast as her legs could carry her, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She dared not look back, dared not think about what she had just witnessed. She just ran, her mind screaming for her to get away, to escape the terrifying reality that had just unfolded. She finally reached her house, bursting through the front door and slamming it shut behind her, locking it with trembling hands. She leaned against the door, her body shaking uncontrollably, tears streaming down her face. What was that? It can't be real. It just can't." But deep down, she knew it was real. She had seen it with her own eyes. The glowing eyes, the skeletal figure, the blood-curdling screams, they were all etched into her memory, a horrifying nightmare that she knew would haunt her forever. She stumbled to the living room, collapsing onto the couch, pulling a blanket around herself for comfort, even though the night was warm. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the terrifying images, but they kept flashing in her mind, vivid and real. Suddenly, she heard a faint scratching sound coming from the window. Her eyes snapped open, her heart pounding in her chest. She held her breath, listening intently. The scratching sound came again, louder this time. It sounded like long, sharp nails dragging across the glass. Tyra let out a silent scream and stumbled backward, tripping over a rug and falling to the floor. She scrambled backward, away from the window, her eyes wide with terror. The scratching stopped, and a low, raspy voice echoed from outside. "You're next." Tyra curled up into a ball, burying her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. There was no escape. It was coming for her. The scratching started again, this time on the front door. Her sobs turned into screams. She was trapped. The door slowly opened. And there you have it. A night that began with innocent curiosity and ended in unimaginable terror. What exactly was that figure? Was it a demon? A manifestation of their deepest fears? Or was it something else entirely? Something far more ancient and sinister that had been lurking in the shadows all along? What do you think happened to Tyra? And what about Dash and Simon? Are they truly gone? Let me know your theories and reactions in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more chilling tales that will keep you up at night. Sweet dreams, or should I say, sweet nightmares.